Прийшли окупанти до нас в Україну, форма новенька, воєнні машини, та трохи поплавився їх інвентар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російські танкісти сховались в кущі, щоб лаптем посьорбати довбані щі, та трохи у чах перегрівся навар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Приперли зі сходу до нас барани для восстановлення
великої страни.
Найкращий пастух баранячих отар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Хто води всяке озброєння різне, потужні ракети, машини залізні, у нас на всі доводи є коментар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Вони захопити хотіли нас зразу, а ми зачаїли на ордів образу з російських бандитів, робить примар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російська поліція справи заводить, там вбивцю рашистів ніяк не знаходить, хто винен, що в нашому полі глухар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Веде пропаганду кремлівський урод, слова пропаганди ковтає народ, тепер нове слово знає цар.
Байрактар.
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 Yes.
The Leaf Spring Army sends its regards.
Русский военный корабль. Предлагаю сложить оружие и сдаться. Русский военный корабль, иди нахуй.
Наші
Hello everyone, I'm the Enforcer, and welcome back to day 693 of the news. Of course, we have a lot to cover tonight as a large riot broke out in the Ural Mountain region of the Russian Federation. We also saw that apparently some factories have suffered some very serious sabotage due to the hands of pro-Ukrainian partisans and freedom fighters inside of Russia, and we're also starting to see that the Russians are taking increased losses in the area of Avdiivka over the past 24 hours. It has been a major news day, probably as major as they can get, and the news we're getting from inside of Russia is showing a very interesting story, at least at the moment. I'd also like y'all to know, to many of the amazing viewers who pointed this out to me, as this is coming pretty much fresh off the presses, and something that I was not able to pay attention a lot to before the stream, at this very moment, while we are live, the nation of Pakistan is currently conducting an aerial bombardment campaign against the Islamic Republic of Iran. We're going to be trying to keep up to date on that news as best as we can, and we probably will include a news segment about that tomorrow, because the news is coming out as we speak, although it has been going on for nearly 8 hours before the stream went live on air. We still want to make sure to bring out the best and most accurate news that we possibly can to all of y'all, and we'll be making sure to put out a news segment on that most likely tomorrow. Nevertheless, we will be going through the Ukraine war news tonight, and the news is truly amazing. Absolutely incredible stuff, because way off in the deep of Russia, in the area around the city of Ufa, and Ufa is actually a little bit of an older city, but I won't bore y'all with a story in the history of Ufa and how it became a city at all inside of Russia. What's more important to get out of Ufa is that Ufa is a funny name. And not only is Ufa a funny name, Ufa is one of those far-off flung regions of Russia, way away from the main cities of Moscow and St. Petersburg, and is one of the places that the Russian Federation likes to draw up its manpower for its armed forces. This is where a lot of those partially mobilized come from, is oblasts like these. And over the past few months, really the past few years, it seems as though that things have not been going all too well inside of the city of Ufa, and particularly throughout the Russian Federation. While we always hear within these major cities that there is a big focus on, keeping the war going and supporting the Russian Federation and President Putin through all of his glorious triumphs of the Western world, the story of the people way off in the far-flung provinces and regions of Russia is a different one. These people are the ones actually carrying the burden and the weight of knowing that hundreds of thousands of Russians are being killed on a yearly basis at this point inside of Ukraine. And we've seen that apparently this has made a boiling point today. A while ago, a certain person inside the region of Ufa incited protests that were largely peaceful, but they were peaceful demonstrations to show that the people of Ufa were not necessarily big fans of conscription, and were also not really big fans of the war as well. The ringleader was arrested, and he was put on charges of inciting a racial riot. Just today, the Russian government found him guilty of his crimes and has sentenced him to 4 years of hard labor inside of a penal camp, which is the modern-day equivalent of a Soviet-era Gulag. This was met by massive public outcry and backlash inside of the Ufa Oblast, which actually has another name, but I'm not even going to try and attempt it because I would butcher the name. But nevertheless, the riots began just this morning, and we got to see that at the very early twilight hours, the small amount of cops that were already starting to arrive on scene were beginning to be encircled by this already disheveled and angry mob of people who had heard that someone who actually stood up for once in their lives for their rights and their freedoms as individuals had just been convicted of a crime today that practically didn't exist in their minds. But you see them starting to surround the police. And the video clip ends abruptly right there, but just a little bit later, we saw this small crowd of cops apparently started to try and beat the protesters, but you can see that the small crowd of cops had started to get overwhelmed by a sea of an angry mob in this region that is now starting to take out their anger and frustration on about the Russian government onto the Russian police, an extension of the Russian government. And we can see here that the police have out their clubs and they're smacking the protesters, but doesn't seem like it's doing all too well. They're largely helpless against the wave of protesters, the wave of rioters at this point, that are starting to throw them around, and not only that, throw rocks at them. moving on from that little bit of news and on into our next clip that we also got, we could see continued footage coming out of the riots that were happening in this area of the Ural mountain range. We can see here that the cops are getting rocks thrown at them by thousands of rioters that have now surrounded them, and it appears that the cops are trying to retreat out of the area, now being encircled. We can see the rioters throwing snowballs, maybe rocks covered in snow. And it looks like they may just actually be snowballs. And we can see the cops trying to hold still in the middle of this, pretty much an onslaught for them. And we can see a rear line has also been created by the cops on the other side of the street. But these people are clearly angry. This riot continued on for multiple hours until the rumors started to circle around that the Rosgvardia was possibly being mobilized to move into the area and put this riot down in violent fashion. Of course, I don't need to explain what in Russia violent fashion looks like, but it appears that after several hours of serious rioting in this area of Russia, the riots began to calm down and disperse, but not before the Russians, of course, made some additional inflammatory comments. And I'll tell you all what those were as we watch the near end of this riot as the people started to disperse in fear of their lives for the most part. But what we heard today, after this riot started to calm down, like we're seeing right now, is that the Russian government said that such an incitement of a riot is trying to overthrow the Russian government. And therefore, the ringleaders of this organized riot here will be found and will be charged with insurrection against the Russian Federation, punishable by a minimum of 15 years in federal prison inside of Russia, or 15 years in a hard labor camp at a minimum. The maximum sentence is not even determined. You can see the large detail of cops that has now arrived, standing around the area. We see our cameraman here not really capturing much of it, just trying to keep the camera concealed most likely. You see once again the cops, the best we can at least. And we can also see this one guy eating snow, right there at the literal end of the clip. But going off of this montage of film that transpired throughout the course of the entire day, from the break of dawn and on towards the evening hours, which we're seeing right here, or the late afternoon, it appears that there is a large amount of anti-government animosity outside of Moscow and St. Petersburg. The issue is that we rarely see it on our end. We rarely get to see stuff like this, because usually these outbursts and backlashes are a little bit smaller and kept a little bit quieter, because people are scared of the Russian government and the reprisals that they may make on the public because of their public outcry against the war and against their people being sent into a meat grinder. Beyond that, however, it does seem that there is a lot of anti-government sentiment in Russia that just isn't being tapped into properly. And it appears that this riot that happened today out here in this oblast has very similar traits to the Wagner Revolt. And although the Wagner Revolt was one that actually involved the force of arms, and they almost made it into the city of Moscow itself, it appears that this one suffered from similar leadership traits. There's a lot of hatred for the central Russian government, and I would assume for Putin directly. And people would be more than happy to voice these outbursts and try and do something about the Russian central government, but it seems as though everyone stops right before things really boil over and action's actually taken, because they're scared of the real reprisals that may happen to them and their families if they continue to follow through. A lot like the people that we saw out here near Ufa today. Going off of that, it seems as though, sadly, this little riot didn't turn into a major ordeal where we saw that the Rosgvardia had to be brought in. And of course, many people are going to say, well, that's not that sad because these Russian citizens didn't, possibly lose their lives. But at the same time, while they didn't lose their lives, they are still going to be living under an oppressive regime inside the Russian Federation that has absolutely no care or concern with sending people like these to their deaths in a battlefield inside of Ukraine, a country that they illegally invaded 2 years ago. that's nothing of a concern to the Russian central government. And while they may survive many more months, who's to say that those men that weren't involved in that riot may be found, arrested, and put into Russian prison, and then voluntold to go and serve in the front lines of Ukraine? What these folks have done is save their lives today, but only for today. They may not be around tomorrow or months in the future, because they most likely will become soldiers for the Russian military. However, at the same time as this was going on inside of the Oblast of Ufa, which I'm still not going to try and pronounce its actual name, we're going to be moving all the way down into the Oblast of Rostov-on-Don and into the city of Shakhty, a very interesting named town, and just about 40 miles north of Rostov-on-Don itself, the city for which the Oblast is named after. This city has been producing some war materials, really just general materials at large, but we've seen today that apparently Shakhty has taken a little bit of a blow, literally. The plastics plant exploded. Or the polyester plant, but I'm going to call it a kind of a plastic, because polyester is still kind of a plastic. But anyways, let me go and take y'all to the other video of the security camera footage first, because I think that would be better for y'all to see how this plant exploded. It was actually very violent, and we don't know the exact cause of the explosion yet, whether it was incompetence or what. But really quickly, let me check that. Let's see. In one sec. Let me make sure to get rid of that. But moving on from that, we can see the explosion right here. Fairly violent one. Actually pretty wild. And the security camera video clip ends there, but we can see later on in the day, the fire was still burning very heavily out of this polyester plant, and it took some incredibly serious damage, probably completely destroyed at this point. Those are the ends of the two clips we have, but there has been rumors that the Shakhty polyester plant explosion was actually caused by partisan activity, which led to the failure of either the factory's internal systems or to an explosion that was from a bomb. We're not exactly sure what the story is at the moment, but considering that this happened a fairly serious explosion on the exact same day that tension started to finally boil over all the way over in Ufa, these two things may actually be related to each other and showing an internal picture that is starting to strongly indicate that what we've been hearing about the Russian public and what we've started to kind of believe lately, that the Russian public is actually largely behind the war or mostly indifferent to it, may not be true. It may be the fact that a lot of the Russian citizenry is in fact not a big fan of the war and may actually hate the Russian government for the continuance of it. It's just that they're scared to speak out and say that publicly because of reprisals. And so a lot of these people keep to themselves and don't say much. And very rarely, like today, we see that this finally starts to boil over. And a lot of y'all have been thinking and speaking about how this may actually show the weakness of the central Russian government. The Russian central government has been shown to already be weak and very fragile during the Wagner uprising of the middle of 2023 or mid-2023. And going off of that, we've seen that many groups have started to possibly challenge the authority of the Russian central government even in this present day. And we've really started to see that at this moment today with a major riot like this, and also the hint and notion here and there that there are apparently armed rebels now roaming around in the Caucasus Mountain region, specifically within the Ingushetia Oblast, or the Ingushetia Autonomous Republic. I'm not sure of its official naming terminology down there, because I think most of these little oblasts, which is what they really are, I think a lot of them are technically called autonomous republics down here, although they still fall under the direct control of the Russian central government. But many of y'all have started to talk about, are these riots in Russia making the central government weak, or is it making it appear that the central government truly is weak, like they really are, and they're just trying to put on a front so that way more people don't take advantage of the Russian central government's weakness and begin to try and rebel against them? The overwhelming majority of y'all said that these riots and what we're seeing today in Russia is certainly showing that the Russian central government is very weak and may actually be on the very precipice of collapse. This is something that 2 out of every 3 of y'all are saying at the moment. Only 16% of y'all said no to that and said that the Russian government is perfectly fine, and these may just be internal uprisings that won't affect the security of the Russian Federation at all. And 24% of y'all rode the fence. A good way to answer any question, and said maybe. And said that this may be affecting the security of the central government, but at the same time, it may not be. Y'all don't really know. And still, that's a fairly good answer. Beyond that, however, if I had to tell y'all my belief, I think that this is once again showing that the Russian central government is on a very weak foundation. I don't believe that today is going to be the day that we see the Russian government collapse entirely and just fall into the abyss, never to be seen again. I don't think that that's going to happen because of today's events. But it is once again showing the Russian public that the central government is weak, and there is a chance to possibly rise up against them and make a change, or at least show your displeasure with the central government. Keep in mind that some of these clips that we saw all the way out there in Ufa are in fact showing that this was published on Russian news agencies. People across Russia saw these riots today, and it appears that the Russian central government wasn't able to censor these clips quick enough, unlike other instances where they were. And going off of that, I think that that may start to kindle some of the unhappy spirits of Russia and send them into their tizzies that we see them occasionally get accustomed to, like with the Wagner group. So I'd have to say a lot of y'all, I think, are on or agreeing with me. I think that this is showing that the Russian government is truly weak, and they may be as easy to topple at this point as a stack of dominoes if done properly. But moving on from that little bit of news, and moving on from that question, which so many of y'all actually answered, nearly 2,000 of y'all wanted to answer that question, it's also showing that internal dissent within Russia is getting pretty serious. And on top of that, instances of incompetence for the public in Russia to see are starting to become a little bit more common, like near the city of Bryansk today, where a Russian MIA ended up having to conduct an emergency landing, and this passerby just caught the aftermath on film. And we can see the MIA just chilling. It looks more like an Mi-17, though, from the nose cone. But it's just chilling there on the side of the road. And also, this thing probably was used against Ukraine, or at least planned to be used against Ukraine, because we can see that it does have S-8 rocket pods. It appears that it probably has 40 rockets on board the helicopter, one in the pod on the left, one in the pod on the right. But beyond that, that's the end of the clip right there. And I gotta say, it's very interesting to note that the Russians are once again running into accidents like that, and also in the helicopter forces, because supposedly the Russian helicopter force, a lot like the Air Force, according to the propaganda statements, is supposed to be well taken care of, well maintained, and well trained. But what we see in the battlefield, like that right there, it's showing us that nothing is really that well done. And once again, just sheer incompetence is leading to losses for the Russian armed forces. But moving on from that little clip, that's starting to show an interesting little story here, I want to quickly take y'all to something that y'all may have been hearing about here in the United States. And this is not a domestic policy matter, because of course we don't talk about internal U.S. politics here on the show, but many of y'all may be hearing about the massive issues that Boeing is running into right now because of their 737 losing part of its side wall, or the side of the fuselage, in the middle of flight, which is starting to cause, once again, many questions about the Boeing 737's safety, which was also brought up years ago when many Boeing 737 MAXs were crashing around the world and led to the grounding of the entire fleet globally, so that way the Boeing could go and test and see if the aircrafts were safe or not. On top of the Boeing 737s once again being brought up into question again about their safety record due to several instances happening here domestically in the United States, it appears that our John Kerry, well, actually, no, I'm sorry, correction. It is our Secretary of State, I believe it was, is currently stranded in Davos, Switzerland at the moment, because Air Force 2, which is a Boeing 737, apparently had some kind of an oxygen leak today, which is now starting to cause even more embarrassment for the Boeing Aerospace Company, and starting to once again bring further into question the safety of Boeing's 737 fleet. Of course, I just wanted to bring up that small side note of news, not having to do anything with the Ukraine war, but still something that's starting to rock the news sphere here in the United States, and something I would be interested to hear about from y'all's end. And also, Rakonda Racing said the 737 MAX, so it wasn't MAX again, had a door blowout. And I did see that, and it looks like it took a section of the wall with it, possibly. But beyond that, I just wanted to bring that up to y'all to let y'all once again know things are starting to happen over here on that end of things that are newsworthy, but sadly we're not covering it here on this channel because we have many more pressing things to cover, like the war in Ukraine. But with that, we're now going to be moving on into our location unknowns. And we have some fairly interesting ones today, and actually a lot of them. Starting off with our first little bit of news, we got to hear that the French today announced that they're going to be sending an additional 78 Caesar self-propelled guns to Ukraine for the Ukrainian armed forces to use. This is massive news because 78 Caesar SPGs is a very large amount of artillery. The Russians had, at the beginning of the war, something around 340 usable Mista-S SPGs, which were very similar in range and firepower to what these Caesar SPGs are able to provide. This means that in one fell swoop, the French are going to be providing a third of the high-end SPG forces that the Russians had pre-war to Ukraine in one go. Of course, they're going to be producing these. They're actually going to be building these from scratch, so they're going to be practically brand new, not pre-used like many of the cars at Carfax, but wonderful to hear that the French are still continuing great support to Ukraine and making sure to give what I would say is probably one of the most revolutionary and possibly one of the best artillery pieces, mobile artillery pieces, that we have seen in Ukraine so far. Of course, however, like Grimlock said in the chat, we are not hearing about the provision of artillery shells from the French. We are just hearing about the provision of even more SPGs. But hopefully, the European nations can band together at the moment, because it appears that the United States is still hung up on Ukraine support, which will hopefully change in the future. But hopefully they can all band together and find a way to produce enough artillery shells that Ukraine can actually field all of these brand new Caesars effectively. But moving on from that little bit of news and on into our next one, many of y'all asked a question yesterday when we finally got the confirmation that the Russian general on board that A-50 AWACS had been killed. How many Russian generals had really been killed across the entirety of the war? And oddly enough, United 24 was very apt to answer that question as quick as they possibly could. And we were able to get an amazing video today from United 24 going over the amount of generals that died in Ukraine and how each of them have died so far. And so really quickly, I want to take y'all to this video. And without further ado, here is United 24.
On the 22nd of September, a missile hit the Black Sea Fleet headquarters in Sevastopol, occupied Crimea, supposedly killing the admiral of the Black Sea Fleet, Viktor Sokolov, along with 33 other Russian officers. But then, the Russian government published 2 videos supposedly showing Sokolov. So, is he alive? Maybe, but as usual, there seems to be something fishy about it. The first video shows him at a meeting, but we never hear him speak, at all. So, it could be an old recording of him slid in or some other sorcery. The second video shows him speaking, but the video released on September 27th also shows Sokolov at an awards ceremony congratulating members of the Black Sea Fleet football team for their performance in the tournament, which already ended on September 18th. In an interview following the commentary, he supposedly comments on the strike on the headquarters and his own death, however without any clear mention of anything really. See for yourself.
А что у нас случилось? У нас ничего не случилось, жизнь продолжается. Черноморский флот выполняет задачи, которые поставил на командование перед ним.
Regardless, the Ukrainian side has vowed to double-check their sources on whether his death can in fact be confirmed. At this moment, anything is possible. But it's not really any use for Ukraine to just announce someone's elimination without it actually being true, because the whole point of the operation is to stop someone from doing their job. Of course, some people miraculously survive the most unsurvivable events. But for Russia, there's also a good reason to hide such a loss. Apart from losing an important commander, his death would also be a huge embarrassment. That being said, the death of any higher military commander is a sensitive topic on both sides. Sometimes it really isn't easy to know the truth. Actually, it quite often isn't that easy. So, welcome to Talking Tactics, where this week we want to give you a short overview of the highest-ranking Russian officers killed or presumably eliminated by Ukraine in the past 20 months of war. We also want to give a couple of examples of how contradicting information can spread in light of such events and how hard it sometimes is to know the truth. Anyway, down to business. The first to go was Andrei Sukhovetsky, Major General, Deputy Commander of the 31st Combined Arms Army. killed by a sniper in the Chernihiv region in late February, early March 2022. His death was confirmed by the Russian side. By the way, in the Russian army, the rank of Major General equals a 1-star or Brigadier General in a Western army. If you're not familiar with the ranking system, typically a full general has 4 stars and then it goes down. 3 for a Lieutenant General, 2 for a Major General, and a 1-star general is a Brigadier General. In the Russian army, it's a little bit different. As just mentioned, a Major General has 1 star. A Lieutenant General has 2 stars. A 3-star general is a Colonel General. A 4-star general doesn't exist. The rank is called Army General. He carries 1 star plus a red star wrapped in a laurel wreath. Anyway, back to the topic at hand. Second to go was Major General Andrei Kolesnikov, commander of the 29th Combined Arms Army of the Eastern Military District, deployed before Ukraine in Syria, killed on the 11th of March. Third was Oleg Mityaev, who also held the rank of Major General and was commander of the 150th Motorized Rifle Division. He was killed in the battle for Mariupol on the 15th of March. The Azov battalion claimed responsibility for Mityaev's death, which was also indirectly confirmed by pro-Russian telegram channels. Major General Vladimir Frolov, deputy commander of the 8th Guards Combined Arms Army, killed on April 10, 2022. The circumstances of his death are not clear, however the Russian side has confirmed his timely demise. Number 5, Major General Andrei Simonov, Deputy Chief of the Electronic Warfare Troops of the Russian Armed Forces. He was eliminated on April 29, 2022 near the town of Izyum, after an artillery strike on the command post of the 2nd Combined Arms Army. Kanamat Botashev, a retired Air Force general who participated in the war as a member of the PMC Wagner. Botashev's Su-25 was shot down by the armed forces of Ukraine on the 22nd of May. The Russian side also confirmed his death. Lieutenant General Roman Kutuzov, killed in action on the 5th of June, first deputy commander of the 8th Guards Combined Arms Army. Also served as commander of the 1st Army Corps fighting under the flag of the so-called Donetsk People's Republic. Killed in Nikolaevka in Luhansk Oblast. His death also confirmed by the Russian side. Major General Dmitry Ulyanov, killed on the 6th of February 2023. Ulyanov was in fact previously retired, but reinstated as commander of a regiment formed from mobilized men from Tatarstan. Major General Sergei Garyachev. At the beginning of the invasion, Garyachev was commander of the 5th Tank Brigade before being promoted to Chief of Staff of the 35th Combined Arms Army. Russian propagandists called him one of the brightest and most effective military commanders of the highest professionalism. He died on June 12th, supposedly by a Storm Shadow missile strike in the region of Zaporizhia. Number 10, Oleg Tsokov, Deputy Commander of the Southern Military District. He died in a strike on the 58th Army's Reserve Command Post in Berdyansk during the Ukrainian counteroffensive in July. There are a couple of more complicated or contested cases. Vitaly Gerasimov, not to confuse with Valery Gerasimov, the Chief of General Staff. Lieutenant General Vitaly Gerasimov served as the first commander of the 41st Combined Arms Army of the Russian Federation. His death on March 7, 2022 near Kharkiv was reported by the main intelligence directorate of Ukraine. This was later even confirmed by the investigative media platform Bellingcat. However, he was later allegedly seen at the awards ceremony of the Order of Alexander Nevsky, so whether he's really dead is unknown. Another case is that of Lieutenant General Yakov Ryazantsev, commander of the 49th Combined Arms Army, reportedly killed on the 25th of March by an artillery strike at the airbase in Chernobyevka, Kherson Oblast, but also his death is contested. There were many rumors of his sighting, and in February 2023, he was listed by the Ukrainian government's war criminals database as alive. Anyhow, if you're asking yourself how come so many Russian generals have died in the war, well, there are a couple of answers as usual. For example, a disproportionately high amount of security leaks. Another is the fact that in the Russian army, lower-ranking generals are supposedly forced to take a hands-on approach due to low morale and discipline. Another reason for so many generals being so close to the front line is that they lack an efficiently centralized command structure like in Western armies, where the whole war is navigated on one platform. So there is a large need for some sort of authority figure on the ground to avoid everything descending into chaos. It's hard to know exactly, and like in most cases, there's probably a bit of truth in all these theories. Anyway, we hope that we are able to show you that being a high-ranking Russian officer involved somehow in the illegal and brutal invasion of Ukraine is a dangerous job, and we do not recommend it. Thanks for watching Talking Tactics. Hit like and subscribe, and see you next week. Also, you can follow us on Telegram to always stay up to date with the latest news from Ukraine.
And with that, that is the end of that amazing video from United 24, but giving us a really good look into how many Russian generals have actually been killed, at least based off of what we can find publicly. And so with that, we are now going to be moving on into our next little bit of Location Unknown news, where we got to see a picture that only can be said to describe fate. This is a Russian soldier sitting on the back of what we would assume is a armored personnel carrier, possibly a BMP-1, and it looks like he's having his last moment right there, and it was caught on camera by the drone that ended up hitting the APC. Nevertheless, a really interesting picture to look at, and one that really makes you think, I wonder what he was thinking when that little frame in the drone was seen. But moving on from that and into our next bit of Location Unknown news, we also got to see a very cool picture of a MiM-23 Hawk in service with Ukraine. These are some really interesting little systems right here. They aren't seen commonly, but the U.S. has provided them. These are actually the iHawks, the improved Hawks, which are the modernized and slightly improved version of the Hawk, which has been in service in some form in the U.S. Armed Forces since around, I believe, 1958 or 1956, if I remember correctly. These things are somewhat old, but still quite effective. At least against older Russian aircraft. But beyond that, still a very interesting thing to see that the Ukrainians are still relying on U.S. Air systems that were sent over, and I gotta say that it is wonderful to know that the Ukrainians seem to be liking it a good bit. You can also see that U.S. Army is still inscribed on the side of this Hawk missile right there, which is kind of cool to see, and great to know that the U.S. military is repping the set, even when it's not on the field. But moving on from that and into our next bit of Location Unknowns, we also got to see that a Ukrainian drone has been introduced recently. We've never seen it before, but it appears to be jet-powered. We've, once again, not seen this drone ever on film or on camera until right now, and it seems to be of an entirely new design, possibly some kind of a dumb bomb that has been converted into a flying drone. It uses one of those model RC engines that I've been talking about, and still really interesting. We don't know a lot about its range, its speed, anything for that matter. All we have is this one picture right here, and the fact that it's jet-powered, and that's all we know about this thing. Hopefully it'll end up being effective, and it also appears that the landing gear drops off after takeoff. We can see that the actual drone is kind of sitting in a cradle that allows it to take off on a small airstrip, and then after it takes off, the landing gear falls off the bottom, so it can be reused for another kamikaze drone. Nevertheless, really interesting development by Ukraine, and hopefully this is an improvement on older and more tried and true drone designs. Moving on from that little bit of Location Unknown news and into our next one, I also have to bring y'all back to yesterday really quickly and show y'all a little clip, because y'all may remember yesterday that we saw the Russians walking around in a tunnel. And I'm not going to show y'all the entire thing, but I'm going to brush everyone's memory up because we have a follow-up on this interesting and cool little Russian innovation today. Many of y'all didn't even believe that this thing was real yesterday, and I was actually one of y'all. I was starting to believe that these tunnels were just complete fabrications and not real. It was just an extension of Russian propaganda trying to make it look like the Russians are doing well. Well, y'all wouldn't believe it. We were able to get proof today that the tunnels are real, and as quickly as the Russians posted about the tunnels were lost. We don't know how, we don't know why, but a fire started in that very tunnel we saw on film the other day, and the tunnel burned to the ground. This is what it looks like today. Y'all wouldn't believe it if I told y'all, because we literally covered this yesterday, and it was a massive discussion. Is the tunnel real? Is it not? What the hell is that? And everyone came up with a consensus. I think it was like 60-something% of y'all said this tunnel is fake beyond belief. It is straight up propaganda. I don't believe it was, because the Russians started taking pictures today of one of them that apparently just burned to the ground overnight after the video was published, and it has taken some pretty serious damage. And notice something. I'm going to take y'all to the old clip from yesterday, because there were two different tunnels we saw of that nature yesterday. Notice that when the lights turn on to this tunnel, the planking there on the floor is pretty similar to what we're seeing down there on this floor, indicating that this may be the exact same tunnel we saw on film the other day, and it did not bode well overnight. It crisped up. We can also see that it is, in fact, a real tunnel. There is an entrance to the outside world. We can see a little bit of what it seems to be a tree out there, and a sloped walkway that goes into this massive tunnel network. So, sadly, all of us were wrong yesterday. This tunnel is in fact real, but it did not survive longer than 24 hours after we saw it. We can see here that there is a lot of damage to what seems to be some kind of a built-in kitchen for the trench work. And then apparently, according to the caption, apparently a cat also got burned as well, but I'm kind of doubting that because looks like a cat maybe got splashed with water, or I don't know, a little boy or a fat man went off in the kitchen and this thing got flash fried onto the floor. I don't know what happened to the cat, but beyond that, we can see that this little trench work, this amazing, well-built Russian trench work that was going to save Russian lives, apparently just ended up burning to the ground, and it probably will not be used again because now the structural integrity of the entire structure is probably going to be brought into question, or, knowing the Russians, they'll probably still use it, and then the thing will collapse onto them, and then that'll be a disaster in and of its own right. But, gotta say, it's nice to have a little bit of a closure to the story that we opened just yesterday to know that the story has ended, at least for one of these major trench networks. Beyond that, however, I think that it is an interesting thing to note, and we probably will see that the other networks possibly get burned down at later dates. I'm sure many of y'all are happy to know that while, sadly, the tunnel is real, and really all of us, 2 out of every 3 of us were wrong, it still burned to the ground. So whether it existed or not, it doesn't really exist anymore. But moving on from the Lucky Strikes burning down their little tunnels, and I gotta tell you, oh man, I'm telling you, I get no respect around here. Oh man, I went for a cigarette. Oh man, I burned down the entire house. Oh man, it was terrible, real terrible. But moving on from that, we got to see the Russian casualty report over the past 24 hours. And what's interesting to note is that the losses have actually dropped down. The other day, they were around 1,110 Russian troops lost, and the losses in every category were clearly increased. It appears that they have dropped down again today, and so that may be showing, because it's kind of guesswork at the moment. I do not believe that the A-50 flying command post or the general may have had a serious impact to losses, because if it did, it was somewhat short-term from what we're telling right now, because now the losses have gone back down. But hey, 2 Bobcat skid steers for Enforcer Matt. Well, absolutely wonderful to see, and he's still here in spirit. And of course, if anyone was wondering, no, he did not die. He's just taking a break for law school. But beyond that, 730 Russian troops have been lost over the past 24 hours. 14 armored personnel carriers have also been lost as well. On top of that, 24 supply trucks have been destroyed. 13 main battle tanks have been knocked out, along with 10 artillery pieces, 7 drones, 3 MLRSs, and a cruise missile. Overall, the losses were quite good, and I gotta say that it is absolutely incredible to see that the Ukrainian defenses were once again able to rack up some very decent numbers as far as Russian casualties go over the past 24 hours. It is showing once again that the Russians are marching headlong into suicidal charges that are not gaining them any kind of ground along the length of the front lines, which is very good news for us because we know that as long as Russian casualties stay high, they're making very little ground, or the ground they're making isn't even worth it, and as a result of that, the Ukrainians are winning the defensive war, and hopefully we'll be able to move on to winning the offensive war in the upcoming months. But moving on from our location unknowns and towards that front line, many of y'all have been talking about something that's kind of been in the periphery for the most part outside of Ukraine. And this is going to take us over to our Twitter for just a quick moment, because I've been making sure, while we've been live on air, to put up everything that we can find online about what's going on in between Iran and Pakistan. If y'all want to see a little bit more about this, sadly we'll not be covering it on the news tonight, but you can still see what's going on if you click on the link in the description below to the Twitter and go over there and check it out. You can also follow us there, because I make sure to put out little news updates here and there throughout the day. I also try and make sure to respond to everyone on Twitter as best as I possibly can. But there's been a fairly sizable skirmish in between Iran and Pakistan over just these past 8 to 9 hours. And many people are looking at this and possibly saying Pakistan is a nuclear power. Believe it or not, many people don't really think that, and it is a bit of a shocker when you just say that aloud. But Pakistan is a nuclear power that is currently conducting airstrikes inside of sovereign Iranian territory around the city of Saravan, right here just across the Pakistani border. Going off of this, we may be able to assume that this may be a build-up or a leading into a further conflict in between Iran and Pakistan, and completely moving the conflict from inside of the Middle East proper and into what would be Central Asia. Many of y'all have thrown in y'all's comments on if y'all think that this is going to lead to a further escalation, or if there will be any escalations, or whether this will turn into nothing. And a large majority of y'all believe that the conflict in between Pakistan and Iran is actually going to be escalating over these next few days, with 60% of y'all, almost 2 out of every 3 of y'all, saying yes, the conflict will in fact escalate as time goes by. A very small amount of y'all said no, it will not escalate, only 14% of y'all, and another 27% of y'all said it might escalate. It really kind of depends on the variables. I would have to say that at the moment, considering that the Iranians, just to give you all a little bit of context, the Iranians claimed and didn't claim at the same time, the message was somewhat unclear with the government, that they were attacking terrorist camps within Pakistan. Because if y'all don't know, Pakistan and Iran's favorite pastime as completely separate countries is to fund completely separate terrorist organizations. Some of y'all may know some of the terrorist organizations that the Pakistanis have supported throughout time. Groups like Al-Qaeda, and the Taliban, and the Mujahideen, and also the Tamil Tigers, which exist in eastern India, and is, in fact, the largest terrorist group by numbers anywhere in the world, even to this day. The Iranians also support other terrorist groups as well. Groups like the Taliban, the Mujahideen, Hezbollah, Hamas, other kinds of groups like that, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. There are a lot of groups that Iran also supports as well, but both of them kind of fight their proxies by supporting terrorist organizations throughout the area. And going off of that, and going off of the Iranians, semi-proxy, but literally attacking Pakistan because the targets that they supposedly struck were inside of Pakistani territory, and now the Pakistanis striking supposed terrorist bases inside of southeastern Iran. This is starting to kind of culminate into a bit of a big deal, and I think this may be an escalation into a larger conflict, or at least a major border skirmish like we would see in between Pakistan and India several decades ago, and sometimes that even happens still in the present day. But beyond that, I gotta say, things are going wild down there in Central Asia and the Middle East, and things are just hanging on by a thread right now. I don't think we've seen the region get this close to outright blows amongst the actual countries that are there. Not the United States getting involved in a conflict there, but the actual countries there since the Iran-Iraq war. I don't think we've seen anything like this since that time in history. But moving on from that news and back towards Ukraine, it's time for us to start getting off of what's pretty major news, but sadly it has to be a bit of side news tonight here on this channel. But many of y'all have also been throwing in questions, and I've got to say, they've been some very interesting questions, and also incredible support as well to the channel. And I got to thank everyone who's been supporting the channel tonight, because you're helping me to keep the channel running, and I'll be making sure to address both y'all's support to the channel, and also what y'all have added on as comments to your support, if you have one. But our first super chat is a massive $100 super chat from Sinful J, an absolute legend and old guard of the Lee Spring Army. Sinful J said that he just wanted to say thank you for what you do every day and the dedication you have to be on here 6 days a week and what you have done to help Ukraine. And I've got to thank you so much for the massive support, Sinful J, and I got to thank you for the kind words as well. It means a lot to us that folks like you are helping this channel to keep on running. If it wasn't for y'all, we wouldn't be able to make this thing possible and keep it running. And so thank you so much for folks like you that have helped to make this thing possible. I got to thank you so much because while I'm kind of sounding like a broken record right now, support to this channel is something that we kind of like to overstate, but I can't understate how important it is. The channel does not run on thin air. The channel does rely on support from viewers like you, Sinful J, who enjoy the channel and find it worthwhile to support it. And your support is helping me to be able to keep this channel on air and keep it rolling even right now. And so thank you so much once again for the massive support, and thank you for the kind words, because your support is directly helping me to keep up my work ethic of staying on air 6 days a week and covering this news. No matter how long it takes, how much has to be covered, and what's going on, the news will come out. The news must flow, and the spice must flow as well. And so thank you so much once again for that massive amount of support, Sinful J, and I hope I was able to address that well. And moving on from that, and before I even get into this one, I've seen so many people giving condolences, and I've got to thank every single one of y'all for being incredibly kind, because the super chat we're about to read is a very sad one, and I have already got to say I was able to read it a little bit earlier, and it's very unfortunate. But this is a $71 super chat from Joseph Andronako, and Joseph Andronako said in his super chat that his wife died 19 days ago. At 71 years old. And thus, he sent in a super chat of $71, $1 for each year she lived. This group has eased the pain and helped me, and thanks to all. And I've got to say, Joseph, I'm terribly sorry to hear that your wife passed away just 19 days ago. I know that's got to be incredibly tough on you, Joseph. I know that when close family members of ours, like grandparents, have died, it's been incredibly tough to get through that on our end. And I know that having a wife die, which is the person that hopefully you love the dearest in the world, that's got to be a very tough thing on a person. I hate to hear that. And I'm very happy to hear that the Lee Spring Army was able to help you get through these very difficult past 19 days. And hopefully we're able to help you to get through the rest of them, because it's very tough to lose relatives, and it's something that you never really get over. You usually, once relatives die, at least in my family, I usually kind of measure events off of how long that event happened after someone in the family died. Like one of my granddads actually died way back in 2018, and every once in a while I'll say, that was like 3 years after granddad died, because that's a thing that everyone remembers. It was a terribly sad time, and it's a way to measure how much time has really passed. But beyond that, I've got to tell you, I'm terribly sorry to hear that, Joseph, and I hope that the Lee Spring Army is able to continue to help you to get through these difficult times. And while the sadness never really goes away, it's always a sad moment to sit and reminisce about loved ones that passed. I hope that things do get better for you, and I hope that the Lee Spring Army is able to help you out in such a difficult time, and I'm glad to hear that we have been able to so far. And so thank you so much for the support and helping the channel to keep on running. And once again, the entire Lee Spring Army is behind you. If you need anything, if you want to console in anyone, the entire Lee Spring Army is here for you. And I'm also here for you as well. And I got to thank you once again for being with us forever, Joseph. And it's terrible to hear that once again another old guard like yourself, Joseph, has had to deal with a loved one passing away. Of course, an amazing member of the Lee Spring Army, CME4PC, as you all know, passed away last year, very later on into the year. And it's terrible to think about things like that, because it's always sad to think that those folks won't be with us. But it's always it's always a bit of a silver lining too, because you get to think of all the amazing things you got to do with them, and you got to know that you were the one to spend that time with them. And that's kind of a silver lining, if there ever was one, to people passing away. But I've got to say, terribly sorry once again, Joseph, and I wish you all the best. And I know that we'll all be here for you, because that's what the Lee Spring Army is for. And so with that, we are on to the last one. And actually, I'm going to be reading off two of them. Or this isn't going to be the third one. We're actually going to read off four. Because there is one from Uncle Grandpa that I'd like to address, because there may be a little bit of good news in that category. But moving on to Rick Clay, who threw in a 50. And hey, thank you so much once again for the support. And Rick Clay said, Enforcer, I'm in LinkedIn jail and will resume comms when freed. I'll give a scoop soon. A new anti-aircraft system being developed, being deployed soon. And I got to thank you for the massive support, Rick Clay, and helping the channel to keep running. And on top of that, I hate to hear that you're in LinkedIn jail. I don't know what you did, but apparently it may have been a misdemeanor, because you're expecting to be out soon. Beyond that, however, I look forward to hearing your additional news on an anti-aircraft system that may be deployed soon, and maybe we'll get to see it in action and see how effective the thing is. But still, thank you so much once again for the support, Rick, and helping this channel to keep on running. Because, like always, folks like you supporting this channel help me to make it possible to stay on air and do this day in and day out. And speaking of which, because it's become a solitary statement now that I'm running the channel and I'm keeping it going and everything like that, I have to address one last super chat, because Uncle Grandpa brought up something very interesting. But before we move on to his, I got to thank you once again, Rick, for the massive support and helping me to make this channel possible. But Uncle Grandpa threw in a 20. And I got to thank you for the support, Uncle Grandpa. And he said, we miss Enforcer Matt, but Enforcer is doing a wonderful job flying solo. And I got to thank you so much for that. Before I address the second part of your super chat, I got to say, there may be some good news coming down the pipe. Matthew and me were talking today about him focusing on law school, and now that he's stopped being on the stream and he's focusing on law school, he's realizing that law school doesn't take up all that much time, and it's pretty possible to do the stream at the same time. So here in a few days, I don't know, can't make any real guarantees yet, but we might have a return of Enforcer Matt within the next few days. I hope that that's the case, but we'll have to see. But and I also don't want to give any false hope just in case if it doesn't happen, but there may be some really good news coming down the pipe as far as it goes with Enforcer Matt not being here on air. But I have to say, thank you so much for giving a compliment about how the stream's been running solo. It's been something that I've always been really stressed about, how this channel will run solo if it ever had to, God forbid. And of course that day finally came about a week ago, and it's been running solo ever since. And I've got to say, it's something to think about that somehow things have not been going that bad running solo. I was very scared that things would be going terribly, and nevertheless, I've even somehow been able to do above my expectations of how bad it was really going to be, and it's ended up not being all too terrible. But still, many of y'all have been saying that y'all miss Enforcer Matt, and I'd have to agree. But of course, that's entirely dependent on whether he actually feels like he can manage both the stream and law school at the same time. I can't overstate this enough. I may make it look like a cakewalk because I get on here and sound like I have no pressure on me a good bit of the time. But at the same time, law school is a very strenuous and very stressful thing. It takes up a lot of time. It takes up, I would say, a minimum of 40 hours or more a week, probably more close to 60. And then on top of that, on my end, I'm working an additional 60 hours a week on top of it. And I've just kind of gotten used to accepting that my life pretty much consists of nothing but waking up in the morning and working until the very end of the night on one thing or another, and then going to sleep and repeating that the next day. And while I've been able to accept that, it has been somewhat tough on Matthew, because while Matthew works less hours, it's still a very stressful thing. The stress and the pressure of it is very, very tough, and every once in a while I have a very difficult time trying to deal with it myself. So if he can't come back on, I completely understand the decision. But we started talking about a day. He was like, it seems like it wasn't that bad, being on the stream and also doing law school at the same time, because now that I'm not doing the stream, law school seems like a breeze because he has nothing but time to dedicate to it. And so with that, I hope that addresses that first part well, Uncle Grandpa, because, I didn't like to, hear that Enforcer Matt was taking some time off, because, it's not like it was a shock to me, because Matthew had actually been talking about that behind the scenes for about a month and a half. And that's why every once in a while on air, I'd always let y'all know, regardless of what happens, regardless of what comes down the pipe, the channel will always run, because I didn't know if Matthew was going to eventually have to take a pause from the stream at any point. I always wanted y'all to know that even if Enforcer Matt couldn't do it, I would make sure that this channel continued to run. And also, Catherine Martin said C+s are not good. Oh man, don't tell me that, because that's all I made last semester. I only made C+s. But still, thank you so much for saying that, Uncle Grandpa, because I'm sure Enforcer Matt loves to hear that, and I'm betting hopefully he'll be back on air soon. But moving on from that, Uncle Grandpa also said, do you think the protests will spread in Russia, or was that just an isolated incident? I honestly think it may have been something along an isolated incident. Whenever we see things like that, it doesn't last forever in reality. It kind of just simmers and then fades away. And I think we might see that that's an isolated incident, at least for now. But the isolated incidents are getting closer and closer together to each other. And I think that that's starting to show that it may not just be isolated incidents anymore. It may be snowballing into a major national incident of huge domestic pressure being put on the Russian government to end the war. Some people, have been saying that for a while, and I'm starting to think that that may be the case. And so with that, thank you so much once again for the support, Uncle Grandpa, and helping this channel to keep on running. And I hope that does address that the best I can. But Dante also said isolated and not war-based. True for the most part, but at the same time, notice how much dissent and hatred there is for the Russian government across the board, to the point that violent riots like these are starting to unfold. It's starting to show that this could all start to culminate in just a general hatred for the Russian government, along with the pressures from the war, and that may start to shift the Russian mindset from that of indifference to the war to that of raw hatred of the war and hatred for the government that is leading to a continuation of that war. And so with that, hope that does address that well, and thank you so much for throwing that in, Dante. Very interesting perspective there. But moving on from the question segment, it's time for us to get back into the news itself. And we're going to be moving into the area of Tavolzhanka, one of the most northerly areas of the front line in Ukraine, and hopefully Deep State UA was able to update their map over the past 24 hours. And so going over these past 24 hours, we can see here that nothing has changed, and the Ukrainians appear to be winning the defensive battle in this area. We got to see that winter on the front lines does not look that enjoyable. I'm not going to lie, doesn't look that fun, but, you know, maybe they're enjoying it somehow. Well, you see them riding around covered in snow. It's still snowing in the northeastern area of Ukraine. And that's the end of that clip, but showing us a little bit of what a glimpse of winter is like right now in Ukraine. And it certainly does look like a winter wonderland, but it's not a winter wonderland when your hands get really cold and then you walk into a warm house and then your hands do that weird tingly thing that hurts really badly. That is never fun, and I sadly think some soldiers will be going through that somewhat uncomfortable displeasure here in the near future. But moving on from that, we also got to see the Ukrainian soldier having to shovel the snow out of his trench in the area because the snowfall has been pretty strenuous in the area. Here we can see the brave Ukrainian soldier using his trench shovel here to try and dig out his way through the trenches. Notice that he has two of them, one large shovel and one orange one, as he continues to crawl his way through this trench work. Absolutely incredible to see, and I've got to say, hopefully he's able to dig that trench out and get himself back into some real Ukrainian trench works. And that's the end of the clip, but showing what the snowfall conditions have been like in this area of the front. And notice, those are the only videos we got out of the northeastern area. I think that fighting may have kind of gone into a pause because of this heavy snowfall, but I'm sure it'll resume in a few days. But moving on from that and down into the area of Kuzumivka, we got to see that the Ukrainians did shoot down an incoming FPV drone. It was close, but this was done by none other than the Korn group. But here's the clip. You see them riding in the back of their pickup here. We see the soldier looking around, and it appears he spotted his drone. Starting to take some shots at it. And I cannot tell y'all how difficult it has to be to fire inside of the back of a moving pickup truck at a flying drone. The accuracy you would need to actually pull off a shot like this would be inhuman, but the guy's about to pull it off. And there it went. He got it. It landed just short of the truck. See him continuing to fire. It looks like there may even be another FPV drone chasing after him. And also, Aimless Savant, thank you for pointing that out. Sadly, when I put in the description in OBS, it doesn't have an autocorrect feature or a typo feature, and I'm usually typing that up about 7 minutes before we go live on air, just to make sure it's as up-to-date as possible before we go live. So sadly, there's almost always a typo in there somewhere, but thank you for pointing it out. With that, that's the end of the clip, but a hell of a shot. And what a guy. I mean, like, a shot like that, you don't pull those off often. I mean, hell, I would bet that even your best clay shooters out there with a 12-gauge shotgun probably could not shoot a clay, you know, out of the sky while they're in the back of a pickup truck moving about 50 miles an hour. And this guy did it with a rifle, which is incredibly impressive, unbelievably impressive. But moving on from that little bit of news and into our next bit, we also got to see actually something really cool. I almost choked on my own words there, but I cannot describe to y'all how cool I think this is. Oh, look at that. It's a Barrett M82, a 50 caliber semi-automatic sniper rifle for the most part. And, oh man, it's got a suppressor on it. It's got a great scope. And of course being used by Ukrainian snipers on the eastern front lines. These things are so freaking cool. I think they're the neatest. Look at that. I mean, the lines on an M82. It's just a beautiful rifle all the way around. I think these things are incredible. Sadly, though, these things would never be within reach. These things are $8,500 on the low end, and that's not including an optic or any additional accessories. That is just the rifle itself, $8,500. Still one hell of a rifle, and firing a 50 BMG round, this thing can actually punch through armored personnel carriers like the BMP-3, or even other ones like the BMP-2, the BMP-1, the BMD-2, the BMD-3, the BMD-4, the BTR-80s, the BTR-82, the BTR-60, the MTLB, any of those vehicles it can punch through like butter, even with just a normal round. It doesn't even have to be armor piercing, it can just punch through it with a normal, I think, solid ball round, if I'm correct, but still, what a rifle. And in this last picture, we can just see it sitting there on its own. Thing is beaut. Oh my lord, I love these rifles. I think they're one of the coolest, but we'd never be able to get one on this channel unless if someone loaned it to us, because this would be impossible. But still, love the things. I think they're cool as hell, and I'd love to shoot one day. But moving on from that little bit of news near Kuzmivka, we're now moving all the way down into the Kremenna Forest, because over those past 24 hours near the Kremenna Forest, action has been happening. And the Russians have nothing to show for it. Of course, the front line has not moved at all, and the Ukrainians were able to hold their ground like they always have been able to. And here's our first little clip here, showing Russian failure in their offensive today. Also, I have to mute the music. I know it's common meme music, but it's still copyrighted. And Julian Britt, local gun shops usually do have some pretty high prices like that. I've seen the Barrett M82s brand new on Gunbroker for $8.5, which is a good price, I think. That's fairly good. But I also have seen a gun store in my local area. It's the only one that sells Barrett M82s, and they were selling theirs for $10.5 at the lowest, with no accessories included. So you would have to go get an optic to be able to shoot the thing, and, you know, that's pretty tough. But, yeah, I mean, you know, you can't find those things at cheap prices. And what's even crazier is that a Barrett MRAD shooting like a 338 Lapua round, those things are $15,000. But moving on from that, we can see this guy waste a several $1,000 RPG, and I believe it's an RPG-72, as he tries to fire it at a drone. Just imagine the stupidity behind that. The backblast blows his back out. He throws away the RPG, looks around really confused because he missed the drone, and then he grabs his rifle and then just kind of stammers away. That's the end of the clip. But I don't think that guy learned his lesson. I think he's a pretty goofy guy, because trying to shoot down a drone with an RPG is about one of the stupidest things you could ever think of. Moving on from that and into our next clip, we also got to see that the Azov unit ambushed a Russian tank inside of the Kremenna Forest. We're going to have to mute the Chad music there. And here comes the tank. It's running down the street, you know, well, the road in the middle of the forest. And here comes the drone, landing right into the rear engine bay. It looks like it was a T-80 of a sort. And we can also see them hitting a couple of APC. Well, actually, that's an MBT as well. And we can see some kind of a... Yeah, it's another tank. We can see this one's actually smoking out of the rear exhaust. And sadly, we didn't get to see the engine bay to tell what kind of a tank it was. But still, absolutely knocked out and destroyed. And absolutely beautiful to see. I love to see it. And I'm always happy to see Russian tanks like that being knocked out and destroyed in such an amazing and impressive fashion. We're now going to be moving on from the Kremenna Forest and a little bit further down the lines and into the area of Bakhmut. Bakhmut is a battlefield that has been simmering ever since the Wagner unit officially took Bakhmut at the very early part of this year. But the Russians are still trying to push out, and they did not take any ground in this area at all today. The Ukrainian defensive, much like it is across most parts of the front, was entirely successful again today and was able to hold the line and stop the Russians from making any advances. Today we got to see something really cool way up in the area of Perizne, at least where I put the marker, where a Ukrainian unit set up a little improv MLRS and fired it. These things are a small MLRS, only firing 80mm rockets, but still providing that kind of general artillery support that the units need in this area. We can see them setting it up here. That's the end of the clip. But we can see them setting up their little MLRS right there. And then we can see them firing their little MLRS in this clip. And look how cute it is. This is a little 80mm MLRS. These things are neat. We now see him adjusting it and then continuing to fire. See him adjusting it again. Now we can see a little bit of a slow-mo of the thing firing. And that's the end of that clip. But still, gotta say, it's very interesting to see this little MLRS firing off its rockets, and wonderful to know that they were able to do their thing, and hopefully accurately. But moving on from that, and into our next little bit of news, and further down the line and into the area of Bakhmut, we got to see near Klishkivka that there has been some interesting actions done by the 93rd. The 93rd Brigade was hauling butt with their drone forces and was able to knock out a couple of Russian tanks in the area. And we see them hitting multiple armored vehicles across many different areas. And we can see them showing off the burning APC down there in the field. And that's the end of the clip. But still, wonderful to see that they were able to knock out a couple of armored personnel carriers and tanks possibly in the area. And we also got to see that a Russian truck driver apparently didn't have a good time of it either that day, because the 93rd also tracked him down and got him too. And sadly, Julian, I don't know who makes that little 80mm MLRS. And we can see the drone coming on in, smacking right into the back of the pickup, and we can see it broiling down there on the street a little later. Slow. But still, very nice to see the truck get blown up, and beautiful to know that the 93rd Brigade is really putting in the effort as far as their drone forces go. Beyond that, we've seen that not a lot's really been going on in Bakhmut. And let's see here. Hang on one second. Apparently, and I gotta say this really quickly, as you all know, we have certain people out there that are a little sick in the head. And apparently they've taken the moment to try and send people that I've never seen before in here to try and continue to stir up things. And I want to make this story quite clear, because it seems as though some people are trying to take the chance to throw in a different story. Enforcer Matt and me have been under an extreme deal of stress over the past few months, leading up to law school and starting law school. Because of that, that stress boiled over on both of our ends on air several days ago. That led to a discussion off air about why in the world that happened, and you know, the overwhelming stress everyone's under, both doing law school and also on top of that doing the stream at the same time, which takes up my entire life, so I don't have a life outside of doing any of this stuff. And so when people, you know, sit there and try and make it into something else when Matthew decided that he wanted to spend his time focusing on law school, and I respected that decision, although it's a lot easier to run a stream with a co-host than not, and I decided that, you know, like, if that's his decision, that's his decision. I can't force him to remain on air. That's something that I gotta say is really sad that people try and do, because, you know, like I've tried to make it out to be, and I know that many of y'all were there that night when I made the announcement, that's not really something that I was all too happy about that happened. And I'm still not necessarily, you know, happy about that, but at the same time, I respect the decision. People have to put their priorities face first, unlike hot dog salesmen that kind of just bum around after doing something for 5 years, then they do nothing for the rest of their lives. We're not like that. And so when Matthew sits there and prioritizes his long-term goals over his short-term goals, while that puts a lot more stress on me and puts me in a little bit of a tougher spot, I have to respect his decision because that's what he's decided. And so with that, had to make sure to address that because we have certain people that are starting to try and twist the story a certain way when that's not how it unfolded off air. And I'd also like to say this, because, and I do not mean this in the rudest way, well, I do not mean this rudely at all, but what goes on behind the scenes, you know, to be honest, telling y'all as much as I've told y'all about what has gone on behind the scenes as to why Matthew isn't on air is honestly too much information already. We have had to try and blur or wander down the lines in between our private lives and what we do on air to, you know, make sure that people understand why things have been going on. It's not necessarily people's business at all, really, as to why Matthew went off air. I kind of told y'all that because I felt like y'all deserved to know. I didn't tell y'all that because it's, you know, for some other reason. That would be pretty stupid. And also considering that we have done this pretty much together for 2 straight years, I don't really think it would have ended as easily and quickly for those reasons. That would make absolutely no sense. But with that, hope that does address that well, because I gotta say, you know, and also, you know, I gotta say, if people come in here and try and spin the story that way, I'm not going to have any of that, because that's trying to take something that was purely what it was and what I explained on air and twisting it to try and make it seem like there's some kind of a fight going on behind the scenes, which there isn't. Matthew is still doing completely fine. He's actually been doing a lot better, to be honest. He's been stress-free for many days now, being able to just focus entirely on what he wanted to focus on, which was law school. And honestly, he's doing a lot better out of the stress. But, you know, now he's realizing that, you know, life isn't all about being stress-free. It's also about doing things that are worthwhile. And now we're talking about, you know, hopefully getting him back on air, which hopefully may happen in a few days. But with that, hope that does address that well. And with that, we're going to be moving down the front lines and into the area of Avdiivka, because we got to see something interesting over the past 24 hours. The Russians made no frontline advances as usual, and I got to say, very interesting to note. And we also got to see that apparently some Archer SPGs are being used in the area. And we're going to be muting the music. And we see the Archer preparing to fire. And we see it firing right there. And we now see them clearing the road so that way the cars can go. Oh, man. That, I gotta say, though, that's pretty funny. You get stopped on the road because there's an artillery piece firing right in front of you. Kind of a little bit of a glimpse of war life in Ukraine near the front lines, and really neat to see that the Ukrainians are using an archer near Avdiivka. But moving on from that, and towards Kamyanka, we also got to see that a Russian BMP-3 was destroyed in the area today. And here's the clip. And we can see there are a little BMP-3. Also, by the way, I forgot to give a little bit of context. The BMP-3 has actually rolled up onto a Ukrainian infantry position, and what you're seeing is this thing laying into that Ukrainian infantry position. But it seems as though it wasn't able to do that for long because a Ukrainian drone came into the rescue and took the BMP out. And look at that! Well, you know, I don't think that thing is going to be dealing with any Ukrainian soldiers in the future. In fact, I think the Ukrainians just turned that thing into an easy bake oven, cooking Russians in seconds. But moving on from that interesting little clip and down into our next one, in the southern area of Avdiivka, we got to see that another rare armored personnel carrier, a BTR-50, was abandoned in Avdiivka again. There's a picture of what a BTR-50 looks like. These things are really ugly and fairly rare, but it looks like another one had been abandoned in the area. Pretty neat to see. Love to know that their attacks are failing so badly that even the rare vehicles they're pulling out of storage to get an armored personnel carrier are not surviving the battlefield either. Moving on from that bit of news in Avdiivka, because once again there weren't really any major frontline advances there, it's time for us to move on towards Staromykhalivka and Lozove, where we got to see that the Ukrainians camouflaged an FPV drone bomb to look like some food. Because, you know, that will draw the Russians out for sure.
Отака ось бімбочка тут не важка. Написано паштет м'ясний, пікантний. Зараз підерам попробую однести, блядь. Вони люблять. Тут даже свиня намальована, ёптую, блядь. Свинорилі.
We now see them using this can of food against the Russians, and oh buddy, it popped it open like a Spam can. It's still wonderful to see that they were able to knock the thing out, because that is some pretty impressive work, considering that they made it look like pate. But moving on from that, and a little bit further down the lines towards Marinka, we also got to see a little tank graveyard near Marinka, and showing how costly the battle was. We can see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 easily countable armored vehicles in this picture. A fairly large amount. Most of them appear to be BMPs. It seems as though maybe 1 or 2 of them might be a main battle tank, but beyond that, it's showing some pretty decent losses. And once again, proving that there's some good stuff going on at Marinka. While the Ukrainians may have been pushed out of the town and are kind of holding on to it to a small degree on the very fringe of the western side, they are causing some pretty decent casualties on Russian forces and knocking out a large number of them. Moving on from that area of the line and moving a little bit further down and into the Zaporizhia area, we got to see that near Urals today, the Ukrainians showed off a Turkish-provided 155mm shell. The markings on this thing trace it back to Turkey, and it's interesting to see that Turkey is providing ammunition to Ukraine because they aren't necessarily siding with all the right causes recently in other parts of the world. So odd to see that they're supporting Ukraine with artillery shells, but still great to know someone out there is. Moving on from that little bit of news, it's time for us to get on into our next bit, where near Radinsk today, we got to see that a Russian OSA air defense system was destroyed, and we believe that this is actually the second one in 2 days. Now we can see it right there. And that is clearly a brand new OSA. This is not the one that was destroyed yesterday. This is a brand new one. And it just got hit by the Excalibur round, and that thing is gone. And we can see it's starting to cook. I believe that may be the crew compartment cooking. And it's done for. With a fire like that burned on that thing, it's not going to be usable again. I'll promise you that. And with that, that's the end of that little clip from the Ukrainian Marines in the area, but showing another effective strike on Russian air defense and hopefully weakening their resolve and also defenses against further air attacks by Ukraine in that region. Hopefully awaiting the arrival of the Western F-16s that have been so talked about for such a while. But Tusk. We must move on from the area of the Krenki region and the left bank of the Dnipro, because there's not really a lot going on down there. So now it's time for us to move up to Kyiv to cover the speech from President Volodymyr Zelensky here on day 693 of the war. And so, without further ado, here is the speech.
Бажаю здоров'я, шановні українці і українки. Головне за сьогоднішній день провів ставку. Оперативний рівень, ситуація на фронті зараз. Доповідали командувачі. Різні напрямки: схід, південь, також північ, протидія диверсійним групам, укріплення кордону. Був стратегічний рівень обговорення наші дії цього року, і не тільки обороні. Україна потребує амбітної, активної перспективи, щоб саме у нашої держави була ініціатива, а не у ворога, щоб саме від українських дій залежало завершення війни. Світ підтримує тих, хто має перспективу, і це фундаментальне завдання – зберегти ініціативу, щоб була можливість ставати сильніше. Провів і підсумкову нараду після усіх зустрічей і перемовин офіційного візиту в Швейцарію, участь у Давоському форумі. Там було багато хороших, корисних зустрічей. Європа, Америка, Африка, Азія говорили з політиками і з лідерами бізнесу. Сьогодні урядовці продовжили роботу на форумі, зокрема, щоб залучити в Україну в оборонний сектор більш бізнесових, технологічних можливостей. Дуже важливо, що ми представляємо і не лише потреби України та наших воїнів, усього суспільства, але й попри усі складнощі війни представляємо і спроможності України. Те, що ми робимо, те, що можемо робити, те, чим ми можемо зміцнювати спільну безпеку в Європі. Провів окрему нараду з міністром оборони, готуємо більше сили для нашої держави, нарада з правоохоронцями, зокрема, був на нараді голова Служби безпеки України, основна доповідь щодо протидії колаборантам, щодо знищення логістики ворога. Я вдячний службі за результати. Окремо щодо ситуації з нашими журналістами, зокрема, фактом стеження за журналістами, Служба безпеки України розпочала розслідування і з'ясує всі обставини. Будь-який тиск на журналістів неприпустимий. Особливо я хочу відзначити сьогодні і подякувати усім нашим людям, які продовжують працювати і вдень, і вночі, допомагаючи після російських ударів. Наші рятувальники, ДСНС України, місцева влада, яка дійсно зі своїми громадами, дійсно зі своїми людьми, кожен український лікар, усі медичні працівники, волонтери, кожен, хто допомагає Херсону, допомагає Херсонщині, Запоріжжю, Донеччині, мешканцям наших прифронтових і прикордонних громад, Харкову та області. Сьогодні був черговий удар російської авіації по Куп'янському району. 2 дитини постраждали, в тому числі хлопчик, 10 років йому, дуже важке поранення. 1 людина загинула від того удару, мої співчуття. Це був цілком свідомий російський удар, керованою авіабомбою просто по одному із сіл Куп'янського району. Херсон. Майже безперервні обстріли. На жаль, теж є поранені та загиблі. Обов'язково відповімо окупантам, і кожен бачить, що наші відповіді їм дійсно відчутні. Важливо також завжди не забувати і дякувати тим нашим людям, чия робота – це рятувати після ударів російських терористів. Харків, Ігор Федорченко, 6-та державна пожежно-рятувальна частина та Олександр Гужва з 9-ї державної пожежно-рятувальної частини області. Я дякую вам. Одеса, лікар Владислав Крижановський з Одеського обласного центру екстреної медичної допомоги та пожежні рятувальники сержант Костянтин Вільчинський та майстер-сержант Сергій Пігіхар. Я дякую. Донеччина, Владислав Галушка, фельдшер з міста Лиман, працює в ДСНС, та пожежний рятувальник з міста Торецьк Іван Пономаренко. Я дякую вам. Наша Сумщина, Володимир Пилипенко та Олександр Небелиця, працівники 8-ї державної пожежно-рятувальної частини ДСНС області, а також Владислав Лисоконь, місто Шостка, фельдшер станції екстреної медичної допомоги. Дякую вам за професійність та усім нашим лікарям, усім вашим колегам, усьому колективу ДСНС України, кожній бригаді екстреної медицини, всім лікарям, фельдшерам, медичним сестричкам і братам. Дякую кожному і кожній, хто дбає про Україну, про наших людей, про нашу державу. Дякую всім, хто знищує окупанта та працює заради того, щоб Росія відповіла за все скоєне. Слава Україні!
And Herom Slava. And with that, that is the end of the speech from President Volodymyr Zelensky here on day 693 of the war, and that is moving us into the next segment of this news. Some pretty big news, that we heard today, of course, from the riots in Russia to the explosion of the factories and to the incredulous fighting that the Russians have been doing on the front lines, just getting absolutely slaughtered. We've been getting a lot of incredible news today, but of course, it's not over. No. It is far from over. We must move on into the live chats now, the super chats, and thank all the people who supported the channel tonight and helped us to keep this thing running. And, of course, we also have to address the live chats as well. There are so many of y'all that are still here. 4,800 of you, quite a number. And if y'all have enjoyed the stream, make sure to hit the like. Every once in a while, it does make me quite happy and puts a smile on my face to see that so many people hit the like button and enjoy this channel enough that you'll say, hey, we quite enjoy it, and I've got to thank you so much once again, everyone, for making this such a special thing to do. So many of you all come in every night and listen to this news, and whether it be both me and Enforcer Matt, or just me, or whatever it may be, you'll still enjoy it greatly, and I'm more than happy and cherish what we have here as the Leaf Spring Army and as the Enforcer channel. And so thank you so much once again to every single one of you, and please do make sure to hit the like button. It does make me quite happy, of course. But with that, we're going to be moving on into our super chats, because there are plenty of them, and there are many people who have shown their great appreciation for this channel tonight and supported it to help it to keep running. And of course, I'd like to make it quite clear that you do not have to support this channel to be appreciated for being here. You can, of course, always hit the like button. You do not have to support the channel with funds to help it to keep rolling. Of course, that does make it possible for me to take care of things behind the scenes and make sure that this channel is able to run on air, but at the same time, hitting the like button and subscribing is also an incredible way to make sure to help this channel to keep running. It inspires me that so many people do enjoy the channel, and it makes it worthwhile for me to get on air every night, because I know it brings a great deal of pride and joy to many people to hear that this channel continues to cover the news on a near daily basis as the war continues. But moving on from that, it's time for us to get into our super chats, and we have some incredible ones tonight. Starting off with our first one, which is a $20 super chat from none other than the incredible and legendary BC Skyman, an absolute channel legend, and he threw in a Shiba Inu wearing samurai armor and also hugging a big trophy. I've got to say that Shiba Inu is quite happy and probably has more gold in its hands than Japan had throughout most of its history at that time when samurai were quite a thing. Nevertheless, I do thank you for the incredible support and helping this channel to keep running, because folks like you do make it possible for me to be on air. And I've got to thank you incredibly for making sure that this channel is able to keep rolling and running, because folks like you have made it possible for nearly 2 years for this channel to run with the crazy host and also the funny co-host that has been here from time to time and frequents us on occasion, and may be frequenting us greatly many more days in the future. But thank you so much once again, BC Skyman, for being an absolute legend and once again ensuring that the Leaf Spring Army is able to keep rolling. With that, we are now on to the next one, which is from Steve Blanchard, who throws in an incredible $20 super chat. And this is, in fact, his 5th super chat to the channel. And I've got to thank you so much once again for the support, and apparently treating this channel as much, though, like the US government and the Internal Revenue Service. Once again, paying taxes to the channel to make sure to continue to its running, or more so, its existence. And I got to thank you so much for that. And Steve Blanchard said the tunnel was used for a Russian cooking show. And I'd agree, because the way it burned down was quite fantastic and always incredible to watch a Russian fire, whether it be an armored personnel carrier, a tank, or even a trench such as that. It is wonderful to know that they were able to use it to cook some Russians, a catch, and also a trench line as well. They were able to cook up a lot more than the itinerary showed on the show. But thank you so much once again for the support and helping this channel to keep on rolling, Steve Blanchard, because folks like you have made it possible, and the Leaf Spring Army's combined continuous support ensures that this channel is able to continue its running. And so thank you so much once again, and I hope that does address that quite well. And with that, we are now going to be moving on to our next super chat, which is from a channel legend. I cannot overstate this enough. So many channel legends continue to support this channel and ensure that we are able to keep it running. And I've got to be honest with all of y'all entirely. Doing this voice right now and talking through super chats, I feel like I'm about to be doing that Warhammer thing where they're like, It is the 41st millennium. And if y'all know what I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about. But anyways, moving on from that, we do have a $10 super chat from ASV, an absolutely incredible organization. The ASV has been able to help out with all kinds of amazing things here in the Lee Spring Army, such as our fundraisers and also the continuance of this channel's existence, or more so, the in perpetuity of the channel's continuing, of whatever. I'm trying to come up with something that sounds good, but nevertheless, thank you so much for the support and helping this channel to keep rolling, ASV, because your support, while without comment, does help us to keep this channel running and helps me to make many comments on air. And so thank you so much once again. And we are on to the next one, which is from Siri, who threw in 150 Norwegian kroner, a currency from the northern areas of Europe, the Scandinavians, and joined similarly by the Swedish krona, which is SEK, but the Norwegian krona is NOK, in abbreviation. Beyond that, Siri is a Norwegian viewer through and through, and he said in his super chat, Enforcer and Joseph, though you are on very different paths, know and always remember that you are loved and supported by many. Hugs and kisses from Oslo in Norway. And absolutely incredible to hear such kind words from you, Siri. An absolute legend. And not only that, from the beautiful city of Oslo in Norway. A very storied and historical city. It's also quite a beautiful one, as you can see. Pardon the construction work, we're still working on the improvements. But beyond that, it is quite a beautiful city. And I have to say that the Scandinavians are truly one of the best series of countries I think there is in the world. And very tied together historically amongst themselves. Beyond that, I thank you so much for giving a shout out to not only me, but Joseph, who, of course, sadly lost his wife a little over 2 weeks ago. It is always terrible to hear that people have, lost loved ones like that. And I got to thank you so much for sending some kindness and support Joseph's way and also my way as well. It means a lot to me. And it's wonderful to know that the community is incredibly loving and supporting of each other, and not only supports me, as y'all always do, but also supports viewers like Joseph that are going through tough times. I'm sure it means a lot to Joseph that he can count on a community, 157,000 strong, to back him up during such a challenging time and to ease the pain that he's going through. And I got to thank you so much for that, and I got to thank you for supporting this channel and helping us to keep this thing running as well. I cannot say it enough that folks like you are, along with the people who hit the like button and the folks who subscribe as well, the folks who support the channel are the life's blood of the thing. And I can't ever not say that, because I always want y'all to know that y'all support means a lot. It's not anything that just is, done for fun. It really, the super chats are really what makes this channel possible, what makes its existence a reality. Y'all make it possible for me to be able to keep things going behind the scenes, to be able to pay bills, to be able to take care of things like law school. And if it wasn't for y'all, we wouldn't be able, and I wouldn't be able, to make it possible to be on air each and every night and keep this thing running. And I got to thank you so much for all of y'all supporting the channel, and I got to thank every single one of the Lee Spring Army viewers who enjoy the channel enough and find it worthwhile to support, because if it wasn't for y'all, I wouldn't be able to be here on air. I'm not like any other channel where we magically exist from the AdSense, and I'll show y'all that as a matter of fact really quickly, because many people always go, oh, sure you run on AdSense. Every channel runs on AdSense. There's got to be an ad running. Everyone has ads running. YouTube is nothing but a machine for people to do, minimal effort, make a killing off of it. But I can prove to y'all right here, and I'll show y'all my control room, none of our streams have ads on them. The ones that do, they were copyrighted. And that's also why we mute music and stuff, so that way they don't end up getting copyrighted, and y'all don't have to watch the pesky ads. We try our best to make sure that no streams get copyrighted. And so the monetization is completely off on all of them since the dawn of time. And y'all should never have to watch a single ad to get on the stream. The premise of the channel is that it's entirely free to watch. And if y'all enjoy it enough, y'all would find it worthwhile to support it and help it to stay on air. Beyond that, if the viewers themselves don't find the channel worthwhile enough to support, the channel will fizzle away and disappear. Because I don't want to be one of those people out there who turn on the ads and there's a point, because everyone on YouTube, I will admit, everyone who covers the war has to make a living doing this because it is a full-time job for most everyone. But there is a point where I believe it goes from just making a living to trying to make a killing, and I feel like if we turned on ads and had sponsors, we would end up making a killing, which is not necessarily what I'm here to do. I'm just here to make a living off of this, since it is what I do for a living, and make sure to continue to cover the war news. And that's why we run no ads and have no sponsors, and that's why I always thank y'all so greatly for the support, because it's not like I can just go, oh, if the viewers don't support, I'll just live off of the ads and sponsors, because there is simply no ads and sponsors out there behind this channel. It is just the channel itself. And I've got to thank you so much once again for helping this channel to keep on running, because it is folks like you, Siri, who've helped to make this thing possible. And thank you so much once again. And I hope that does address that well. And with that, we are on to the next one, which is from VP the King. And he said, best Ukraine news channel on YouTube. And thank you for the high praise. Showing my pizza support, and he put in several pizza slices, quite many, 3 of them. And he said, thanks for the hard work at the Enforcer. And thank you so much, VP the King, for the support and helping this channel to keep running. It is folks like you who have made it entirely possible for 2 years now that this channel has been able to run the way it runs. And I think it's incredible to know that folks like you enjoy the channel enough to support it and to help it to keep running. And thank you for the kind words, and thank you for supporting the Pizza Fund as well, VP the King. And I also saw really quickly, 420 said, the Enforcer, you should, IMO, get a sponsor like Walther, or even partner with Daily Wire, etc. I've got to be honest, sponsors are a thing that, at least on this side of things, and also, hang on one second, I gotta check that out. Hang on. I don't know what people are saying that for. I can't find anything on that. I saw a whole bunch of people saying rip so-and-so. I was like, did he die? But no, he didn't. But anyways, I gotta say that it is something to know that people do want us to get sponsors and run ads, and people want us to actually not only make a living doing this, but make a killing. And I thank people for wanting that for us, but seriously, I wouldn't want that, because it feels wrong. And also on top of that, sponsors can end up restricting what you can do. And that's something that ends up concerning me greatly, because it starts to become a question of, what do I have to do to appease sponsors? And that starts to throw up a lot of hurdles. Now I have to start saying things a certain way. And then it isn't my channel anymore, it's the sponsor's channel, and I'm just their mouthpiece. And that's something that I'm always concerned about when it comes to sponsors and running this show. I would take a sponsor for a gun review video, because that's an entirely different thing, and it's not really like they can dictate what I'm doing there much. This is just a gun review, and obviously it would probably be a gun company that's sponsoring that video. But beyond that, I would never want to sponsor on our Ukraine war content, such as our live streams, because that could start to greatly reduce what we're able to say in our liberties. And so with that, I hope that does address that well, 420. But thank you so much for the kind words and wanting us to have the best. But at the same time, I think it is, equally a valid point in my mind to make sure that we were able to keep this channel running. But with, in running the way we've always run it, and just let viewers support it if they enjoy it. But still, Doug DeVore threw in a 10, and he put in a pair that is laughing and crying on the ground at the Russians. And I gotta thank you for the support, Doug DeVore, and I gotta thank you for throwing that in. No comment, of course, but the support does help this channel to keep running, and we are greatly appreciative to people like you, because you make it entirely possible. And so thank you so much once again, and we are on to the next one, which is from Butchie777, who threw in a 10-pound super chat, and he said, for the Pizza and Dog Treat Fund, how are the corgis doing? I hope they are okay. Geschlick Malaikman and Shwigu. And Shwigu! At the Nona Propasna, Boliet. And I gotta thank you so much for supporting this channel and helping us to keep this thing running, Butchie777, because you are a legend. And not only that, you are from Britain, one of our British viewers up at the crack of dawn, much like Siri is in Norway, watching this channel. Really cool to know. I love to know that we have British viewers like you here, Butchie777. And thank you so much once again for helping this channel to be possible and helping it to keep on running. The corgis are doing really good. Sheba, of course, has gotten completely over that snake bite she suffered months ago. Mr. Corgi is back to normal. He's perfectly fine, thank the Lord. And also, geschlickt, weil Leitman in Deutsch involved. Well, we're not going beyond that, but still. And thank you so much for the pizza and dog treat fund, because I know the corgis are going to love some dog treats. And so with that, hope that does address that well. Thank you so much for the incredible support, Butchie777, because it is people like you who help to make this channel possible. And so with that, we are going to be moving on from that super chat, and thank you so much once again, Butchie777, for the incredible support. And we are now moving on to our next one, which is from Mr. Shipwright. I'm going to call you that. But Mr. Shipwright, and I found out the US is sending over GPU and air carts to Ukraine. They are to aid with jets. I have photo evidence if you need. And I thank you so much for the incredible support, Mr. Shipwright. And I would have to say, please do send over that video evidence to me, or photo evidence if you have it. Unfortunately, I have not been able to see any proof of such a thing being sent to Ukraine, and I'd absolutely love to know that something like that is being sent over to further the Ukrainian air support. And so with that, thank you so much once again. Please do send that to us over DM on Twitter. But with that, we are now going to be moving on to the next one, which is from Jason Carpenter. Jason Carpenter threw in a $5 super chat and said, "Do you think that rogue states are trying to divert attention from Ukraine, or simply taking advantage of the current instability?" I would have to say that that is a very interesting conundrum that you have brought forward, Jason Carpenter, and I would have to be quite honest with you. I think the world is just largely an unstable place. Due to the ongoing situation in Central Asia and the current supporting of terrorist organizations within the countries of Pakistan and Iran, I would have to say that this is most likely a continuance of the age-old historical instability that has been seen within the Middle East, at least since the late 1960s and early 1970s. I would have to say that Pakistan and Iran are not necessarily taking advantage of global instability, but more so reacting to the instability that has been caused by both parties in that area of the world. And because of that, I would have to say they're not trying to divert attention, but they're more so creating their own sphere of attention outside the Ukraine war. But nevertheless, I do thank you so much for the support, Jason Carpenter, and it certainly is a very interesting question. With so many rising conflicts around the entire globe, including those of the Middle East, Central Asia, Eastern Europe, and even those within the reaches of South America, a continent very rarely thought to be gripped with practical war, such as we're almost seeing right now between the Ecuadorian government and the cartels, along with other northern South American countries who are also dealing with their own internal strife due to the large power vacuums that have been created due to government instability and the rise of the cartels. It is very interesting to ask that question. Is this instability trying to take advantage of such a world, or is it instability that is rising in and of itself? And I would have to say that when we look at the historical roots of most of this instability, it is more so everything coming together at the same time to create the perfect storm. But thank you so much for asking. An amazing question, Jason Carpenter. Certainly one to really consider out there in the world, and I have to thank you once again for making this channel possible and helping this channel to keep on running. And with that, we are going to be moving on to a live chat from Sarah Rose, who said, "The harsh voice is disturbing, LOL. And I find it quite comforting to do here and there. I hope you do understand, today has been a long day for me. And I very rarely do voices any longer on the stream. This is one that I very rarely pull out as well. It is one that allows me to rest my voice a little bit and also at the same time kind of make it a joke. But I do thank you so much for finding it somewhat disturbing, because I think it may be taken in that vein from some people. But thank you so much once again for letting me know, and I'll make sure to disturb you a little bit further. And Marcia Tucker said, "Did the enforcer study at Eton College and not tell us? LOL. And perhaps I did. Who knows? I have in fact gone to Eton College. I walked through Eton College, which is this this confine of buildings directly across the Thames River from Windsor Castle. It is actually considered to be one of the most posh private schools in Britain, if you want to call it that, and that is where a lot of the posh kids go. Many people like Bear Grylls actually grew up in Eton College, and it's usually where the poshest of kids go. Sadly, I was not able to go there in my proper education. I went to a public school here in Alabama, and I just happened to pick up on the vices of Eton, including the incredible accent just from thousands of miles away and the raw exposure of it. But still, I did learn by osmosis. It did not take too long to pick up on the posh voice, because I went by and I heard a child. He was walking out of class and he said, "Are we going to bomb the Houthis today?" And I said, "Oh, that is an incredible accent. I shall pick up on that and start to use it as my own." And then he also asked me, "Do you want to play a game of Poke the Nanny?" It's where we take a stick and sharpen it up quite nicely. And then we go and poke the nanny and poke her until she stops moving. And I said, "Why, boy, you're really sadistic. But that accent is something." But still, with that, I hope that does address that well. We are now moving on to the next super chat, which is a 5 Canadian from Matt Chair. And he says, "Keep it up. And it's a pair lifting weights." And I gotta say, absolutely wonderful for you to enjoy the stream, support it and help it to keep running, and not only that, want us to keep it up. It means a lot to me, and I appreciate you enjoying it enough that you'd want it to keep up and keep running. It's a great deal to me, and thank you once again for enjoying it to such great lengths that you find it worthwhile to support Matt here, because it just means a great deal to me. Makes me start to boil up and cry. But nevertheless, thank you so much once again for the support, and we're now moving on to a 5 Canadian from another channel legend, Marc-Andre Brunette, who said, "I was a believer that the tunnel was real, but also a believer that it was easy to find with satellite imagery." And I do have to agree with you that it probably was going to be quite easy to find that with satellite imagery. I'm sure that the actual soil cover over the trench work was very minimal and probably very easy to spot, perhaps. But at the same time, I don't think it'll be anyone's major concern anymore, because it appears that the majority of the trench work has in fact burned to cinders, and most likely will never be used again. But thank you so much for the support, Marc-Andre Brunette, one of our amazing Canadian viewers, and helping this channel to keep running. We are now going to be moving on from that 5 and on into our next one, which is from Anton Sugar, who threw in a $5 super chat. And Anton said, "You're doing great so far. And I have to thank you for enjoying the channel, and I have to thank you for saying that it's gone great so far. It means an absolute deal to me that so many people have been able to enjoy the channel even with a singular host. It means an incredible deal to me, because I've been working very hard to try and make sure that the transition from a co-host to a single host is as smooth and as unnoticeable as possible. While many people have missed Enforcer Matt, and he may actually return in several days' time, hopefully, I'm glad to know that I've been able to ease that massive tectonic shift in this channel's continuous running, and to make it somewhat easier on the public. And I thank you so much once again, Anton, for enjoying what I've been able to do. And I'd like to have you know that there was actually a Prime Minister in the United Kingdom called Anton Eden. I don't know if you've heard about him, but he was actually the Prime Minister during the Suez Crisis of 1956, and also had a little bit of a problem with amphetamines. Hopefully you don't. But I thought I'd share that with you, because you share a similar name with a certain so-and-so out there. But with that, I hope that does address that well, and we are now on to the next one. And Hoagie, we'll actually be skipping forward, just getting a £2 super chat from Hoagie1080, who said, "Get yourself a Bud Light Zero, y'all," and thank you so much for wanting us to have a Bud Light Zero. I guess that's the one without alcohol, and perhaps I can fancy a Bud Light Zero here and there occasionally. And thank you so much once again for the support and helping this channel to keep running, because you're helping me to make sure to keep just a finite level of sanity to do this nightly. And thank you so much once again. I hope that does address that well. And we are on to the next one, which is from Kevin Langlois, who threw in his first super chat in the history of the channel. And not only that, he didn't throw in a comment either. Now I've got to thank you so much for the support and helping this channel to keep on running. It is folks like you who've helped make this possible through such a while, and it means a lot to me to know that people like you enjoy the channel enough that you found it worthwhile to support. While not throwing in a comment, the support does say a lot and helps me to keep this channel rolling. And with that, we are on to the next one, which is from Skilled Painter, who threw in a 5 Canadian. And he didn't throw in a comment, but the support does help me to say much on air and make sure to keep this thing rolling. And I gotta thank you so much once again for enjoying the channel enough to support it and help it to keep running, because folks like you have made it possible. And if it wasn't for folks like you, I wouldn't be able to be here right now. And so with that, we are on to the next one, which is from Hamtaro319, who said, "How Deutsch are you?" In particular, in English, that says, "How German are you?" And then he puts Deutschland, Deutschland, Deutschland. Well, calm down there, pal. You're going to be invading Poland before long. But to answer your question, I'm not German at all. That is quite shocking, I know. Many people look at my facial features and go, why, yes, that is the peak Germanic man. And why, sadly, they are quite mistaken. I am not peak, and I am not Germanic either. I am actually nearly entirely Celtic, Anglo-Saxon, and a very small smattering of Swedish. And my ancestry DNA test came back one day, and it said that I was 89% British. Majority of that was Welsh and English, and a smaller tinge of that was Scottish and Irish. And then the remainder 11% of me was 9% Swedish and 2% Norwegian. Later on, they updated the DNA report to then say that I was not Norwegian at all, and I was in fact 11% Swedish, with absolutely no Norwegian blood found within me. So, to answer your question, I am not German at all. In fact, I would probably be the farthest thing away from being a German. I'm more French than I would be German, I do believe. But nevertheless, I hope that does answer your question well, Hamtaro, because I'm not German one bit. And it's incredibly odd, because there is literally no other groups outside of the British Isles and the Swedes that are a part of my genetic makeup. And I've actually joked around out there in the public when people have asked me about, well, what are you? I've always joked around that I'm literally as British as it gets. I'm probably more British genetically than most British people may be at this point, which is absolutely bizarre, because in the entirety of my family traces their history back to really colonial times, before the United States even existed as a nation. We were able to trace that every single part of my family came over 250 years ago at an absolute bare minimum. However, somehow, over the course of 200 and something years of living in the United States and having a massive influx of immigrants from many different countries such as Italy, France, the United Kingdom, which, you know, I am made up of, Germans, Ukrainians, Eastern Europeans, amongst a whole others, somehow my family has literally retained being almost entirely British, which is just a very weird genetic rarity from what we understand, and something that I just am always marveling at, how in the hell I'm absolutely almost entirely British. But with that, I hope that does address that quite well. The accent has absolutely nothing to do with it, because, let's see here, Joshua Jeffrey said, "What's with the British accent?" Well, Joshua, my voice is absolutely fatigued, and this is an easy way to disguise it and make it a little funny, rather than just sounding absolutely mundane. And so with that, I hope that does address that so well. And thank you so much once again for asking an interesting question. And thank you, Hamtaro, for supporting the channel and helping it to keep running. Tisk tisk. But with that, we are on to the next one, which is from Margaret Hemsley, who threw in a 7, or actually an 8 Australian, and she said Morse code, and perhaps I am continuing to put in a brand new Morse code message, and sadly, due to the loss of Matthew, I have not been able to effectively find the Morse code decoders in our live chat and tell y'all what the Morse code message is. There is a brand new one still being put in every night, but nevertheless, it is still something that sadly I have not been able to tell y'all tonight. I do know the Morse code decoders have been here and deciphered the message, but sadly I cannot tell y'all what they said the message was. But with that, I do thank you so much for the support and helping this channel to keep running, because folks like you have helped it to stay possible and help us to continue to endure, whether it be with friends, whether it be alone, whether it be under any circumstance. You are helping me to keep this channel running, and on the first line of defense and the only line of defense, really the vanguard of the Lee Spring Army and its continuation in perpetuity. And so thank you so much once again. And with that, we are on to the next one, which is from well, actually, I have to skip forward here. This one is from D. Henry81, who threw in a $30 Canadian super chat. And I do thank you so much for the incredible support. and helping this channel to keep on running. And he said, "Your channel is excellent. I support your decision of no ads, and I will support the LSA. Question: how safe do we feel here in North America with NORAD, given all the rising conflict everywhere? Fantastic reporting, and keep it up." And thank you so much for the support, T. Henry, and thank you for absolutely enjoying this news coverage that I've provided for 6 days a week for almost 700 days now. We are only 7 days shy of day 700 of the war. I have to say that it is something that I do not take lightly to know that I've been doing this for nearly 2 straight years, and this has been my life. It has absolutely consumed almost every spare facet of time that I've had. And I've been more than honored to know that so many people like you, D. Henry, have enjoyed that, and enjoyed the passion and time and effort that I put into delivering this news. I find it worthwhile to support my ongoing endeavor and mission to continue to provide you all with what I hope is the highest quality news that you can find on the internet. And I also have to say that I feel quite safe here in North America. Unless if the Russians were to attack us intercontinentally, there's not really much that they could do to the United States outside of their intercontinental nuclear arsenal. The United States is largely safe from any kind of an external or international attack from other nations across the seas. They do not have the power projection ability to conduct an attack on America's shores, and so I feel wildly confident in the United States in a conventional war, because, of course, it is something that we largely don't have to worry about. Our incredible and mighty navy will ensure that such rivals such as the Russians and the Chinese will remain confined to their own coastlines and rarely ever be able to venture forth and sally forward into the Pacific and the Atlantic to start conducting attacks along the eastern and western seaboards of the United States. The only attack we would have to fear would be that final attack before we are plunged into a darkness that would descend the world for decades to come, that would come across the Arctic and be that of a nuclear destruction and hellfire. That would be the only one we'd have to worry about, and at that point, there would be no real concern as to whether we would be confident or not, because a war that would end in that way would be an unwinnable one for both sides for sure. And so with that, thank you so much once again for the support and helping this channel to keep on running, D. Henry, because people like you help to make this channel possible. And I thank you for supporting the decision of no ads. Folks like you help me to make that decision a lot easier. Although, if people didn't support the channel, we still would run no ads. It's just that we probably wouldn't be able to exist that much longer. But still, thank you for the incredible kindness of supporting the channel and helping us to keep this thing running. Because folks like you have made it possible. And so with that, we have now officially moved on to our next super chat, which is from Hamtero again, 319, who threw in a $5 super chat. And he said, "Geschickt verlangt in den deutschen Volken." And I gotta thank you so much once again for the support, Hamtero, and helping this channel to keep on running, because I love the joke. It's an absolutely incredible one. And also, you're helping this channel to keep on running. And I gotta thank you so much for that, because it helps us to make this thing possible and helps me to be able to continue its existence on air. And that means a great deal to me. And so thank you so much once again, and I hope that does address that well. And it's time for us to move on into the live chats. And if you want to ask a question, there are 3,600 of y'all who are still here, which is incredible at this time in the stream. If y'all want to ask a question in the live chat, just at Enforcer, and I'll show you how to do it. You type at Enforcer. And let's see here. Hang on. At Enforcer. Hang on. So I can't at myself, apparently. But if you do that, at Enforcer, like, I'm sorry, it's the Enforcer. I'm so sorry. If you at the Enforcer like that, like I just put in the live chat right there, you can direct a message to me. I will be able to see it. It will be highlighted, and I'll be able to make sure to address it. But to address our certain one, certain Def said, "Alright there, and I have a problem." And alright there, you have a problem. Of course, I love people having problems, and the moment is certainly a symbol of the Lee Spring Army. I love it. I love these little silly moments, and they're really funny. And I think we ought to make a patch out of one of these things, because, you know, that would just be great. With that, I hope that does address that quite well. And with that, we are going to be moving on into our next live chat, which is from Alabama Cajun, who said, I miss Matt and his Bobcats. Enforcer is still cool. And thank you for saying that, Alabama Cajun. Sadly, I cannot control whether Matthew is on air or off air. That is kind of his decision in the end, and I respect whatever decision he makes. But I'm glad to know so many people are able to enjoy the channel as I continue to run it solo. And so with that, I hope that does address that well. And we are moving on to the next one, which is from, and wow, so many of y'all started throwing in the live chats. I love to see it. And this one is from... let's see here. I'm trying to get it. There's so many live chats coming in that every time I try and recalibrate, I can't find them again. Goodness gracious, so many of y'all are really throwing in the live chat. That's cool. Joe Dirt said, can we watch the hamster commercial? I would, but sadly I don't have it easy to pull up at the moment. I have to go back through all my maps and try and find it. And Wraith Wrangler said, what percentage chance of nuclear war? I would say maybe like a 7% chance. It's not entirely out of the picture, but it still exists in a small degree. And Christian Cruz said, did you see the Lithuanian NATO military parade? I didn't. I saw the Polish one a while ago, but I haven't seen the Lithuanian one. I'll have to take a look and see what they had in their military parade. Tom Exman said, okay, here's a good question. How many years was the Suez Canal closed in the early 70s? Oh, man, Tom, you got me in one of my historic blind spots. I don't really know a lot about Suez Canal closures throughout the course of history, so sadly, I'd have to declare ignorance. But let me see. Was the Suez closed in the 1970s? Let's see. Navigation through the canal stopped after the Israeli aggression that started on the 5th of June 1967 till late President Anwar el-Sadat announced its reopening. And so, apparently the canal was closed for a grand 8 years. So that would be the answer from 1967 to 1975. So, hope that answers that well, but I actually didn't know that off the top of my head. And Wraith Wrangler asked a really weird question. And I'm not answering that. That's just a weird one. But moving on from that, and into our next one, we see Joe Nider said, greets, I'm Alfarius. Hey, and hello to Alfarius. How are you doing? And Angry Penguin said, can we have LSA like a stamp sideways across it? LOL. And I've still been thinking about trying to get out a Lee Spring Army flag design, but it's very hard because we can't please everyone with a flag design. But I'm still thinking about the red flag with just a white LSA on it. Very simple, very easy to identify, and it would probably look really good as a patch, a rectangular patch. But with that, I hope that does address that well, Angry Penguin. And with that, we are on to our next one, where Aaron Chu said, Enforcer, as of 1 hour ago, Pakistan conducted strikes inside Iran, a Pakistani intelligence official says. And that's true. We actually have that all on our Twitter. And so if you want to see what's been going on over there, link in their Twitter to the description. Oh, we'll link in the description below to our Twitter, and you can go check it out over there. And moving on from that, we're getting on into our next one from 420, where he said, Enforcer, do you think the U.S. has reverse engineered the gravitational tech? I would have no idea. Great question. And the U.S. has always been trying to work on something like that, even from the 60s, like with the Avro car, but I don't know if they're close to any breakthroughs, and I haven't heard anything much about it. But I hope that does address that live chat quite well, at least the best I can, sir. And moving on to the next one, I can see one here from the incredible Panama Floyd, who said, the Enforcer, you'll laugh. My own genetic heritage is all UK, Western European. My mom's an archaeologist, did some historical research. My family landed here with Oglethorpe from the debtor's prison. Oh my lord, that is crazy. You wouldn't believe it. A part of my family also landed with Oglethorpe as well, but they were the hired mercenaries that were meant to protect the Georgia colony from the Spanish in Florida, the French in the rest of what was at the time the eastern United States, and also the Native American tribes in the area. And that specific part of the family was the McKay's Rangers. They later went on to be McCoys. But when they came over here originally, they were McKay's. And they were the mercenaries that were brought over by Governor Oglethorpe of the Georgia colony. They actually, well, as some of them wore kilts from historical documents, a few of them wore kilts, the majority of them actually wore normal trousers, but they were still Scottish mercenaries that used the targe, which was really cool. And what's even crazier is that we learned that after I started reenacting, and I started reenacting And the first thing I ever reenacted was the McKay's Rangers of the Georgia colony. So that was so cool. It was like a cool, like, come full circle kind of thing for my family. One of the first parts of any side of my family that arrived in the Americas arrived in 1736 as a part of that mercenary group and ended up living here after the War of Jenkins' Ear, and they got obliterated. And the ones that survived just ended up living in the Georgia colony. But beyond that, however, it's crazy to think that they came here, the first in America, as mercenaries, and then full circle, hundreds of years later, I end up reenacting as one of them, and had no idea that that was even a part of my family's history until that point. So really cool story, Panama Floyd, and that's crazy to think that part of your family and my family pretty much probably came over at the same time, not that far apart from each other. And so with that, I hope that does address that well. And we are moving on to the next one, which is from Gregory Huey, who said, I'm a physicist. No, there have not been any advances in gravitational tech from aliens or whatever. And I would have to say thank you for sharing your expertise on that, because I would probably agree. And so with that, I hope that does address that well. An alternate email said, do you think the USA will turn into an AI drone-ruled autocracy ruled by Sam Altman? That's a crazy question, but I don't know. You know, the future is weird, very weird. So whoever knows. But with that, I hope that does address that well. And Joe Dirt said, ROF LOL, we're enemies. I'm Cherokee. And hey, you know, I don't, come on. It's hundreds of years past. We're not enemies. We're friends, marching side by side into this glorious future that this nation shall share together. But still, thank you so much for sharing that. That's really cool to know, Joe, that you are Cherokee. Because I actually grew up around a lot of Cherokees. A lot of Cherokees actually still live here in Alabama, and there are reservations that are scattered around here in Alabama. They're fairly small ones, not the kind that you would see out in the Midwest, like in Oklahoma, or up in the Northwest, like in Wyoming, but still a lot of them, and really cool. But with that, I hope that does address that well. And Avari Mandabra said McKay is pronounced Mackay. Mackay. Oh, that's weird, because the reenacting group always said McKay, so I just went with McKay. But thank you for sharing that, and I'll try and say that from here forward. But with that, I think I'm going to try and answer a couple of more live chats, and then we're going to be rounding out tonight's stream, because for some reason, I'm feeling absolutely bushed. And let's see here. And I'm waiting for another live chat to come in. John Smith said, did you cover the backstory to Pakistan, Iran, and China story? A little bit. I think I have in the past. Pakistan is on bad terms with China. Iran really isn't, but both of these countries are supposed to be a part of the Belt and Road program, which is a Chinese plan to build a giant sphere of influence that encompasses the entire Indian Ocean. It's not working for them, and that's the best I could explain the relations at the moment in a nutshell. And so with that, we are on to the next one, which is from Dave Cronky 2, who said, thank you for what you do, and thank you for enjoying what I do. It seems always like a cakewalk, and doing the stream itself is the funnest part of every day. But I got to thank you so much for enjoying what I've been doing, because what goes in behind the scenes is a lot of effort. And I got to thank you so much for enjoying it. And thank you, Alabama Cajun, for saying the same thing, because it means a lot. So with that, I think we are going to move on to... Well, actually, I don't think there is going to be a final question coming in tonight, because I'm not seeing one at the moment. So... on that note, we are going to round out tonight's stream. I've got to thank every single one of y'all, though, for coming here and watching this stream tonight. It means a great deal to me, and it just is, it's incredible to know that so many of y'all have been here and stuck with us, even as we've gone through such a monumental change in how this channel runs, and hopefully it won't last that much longer. Of course, if y'all have enjoyed, please make sure to subscribe, like, and comment, because this stream runs 6 days a week, and is always making sure to cover the news of the war in Ukraine. And if there's any other major news going on, we also try and cover that as well. But that's kind of a rare thing here and there. But still, beyond that, thank you so much once again, everyone, for watching tonight. It's been an absolute honor. It's been a pleasure. And I will see you all tomorrow at 10 p.m. Eastern Time to cover the next 24 hours of the news of the war in Ukraine. Good night, good luck, take care, stay safe, Slava Ukraini! And long live the Lee Spring Army. The Lee Spring Army will never die, and the Lee Spring Army will always prevail. Good night, everyone, and take care.
Yes.
The Leaf Spring Army sends its regards.
Русский военный корабль. Предлагаю сложить оружие и сдаться. Русский военный корабль, иди нахуй.